participate. And I will start with the Learning Lab as an update. You are here. This is an iteration of 2 years of trial and error improvement. We did like 3 hours. Sometimes I think we pushed you to even be 4 hours with us. And after hearing all your feedback, we've arrived at 2 hours is a decent time to be together. Some of you, we have consolidated all our mailing lists of our different plans, and I just wanted to explain that to you. So at PGE, we have one team, the plan that works on the different plans and reports that I'm sharing on my screen: the DSP, the IRP, the CUP, the TUP, the multi-year plan, and the ESG. We wanted to share the efficiencies and the lessons learned from each one of these activities with each other, and now we're working as a group. One of the efficiencies that we have been able to implement is now we have the Learning Labs. And we invite all of you stakeholders participating in all these different plans to one venue. We've heard from you. Can you please talk to each other and connect the dots and create one space where we can have a conversation on relationship to all your plans? So we've heard you. We appreciate that you've pushed us to arrive here. So this is the Learning Lab. The Learning Lab is a space for all of us to interact, and we will inform you of updates on our thinking on our plans. We will seek feedback, and when we seek feedback, this is something that we're really trying hard to create a mechanism to share the transparency on how are we using your feedback, when can it be used, when it cannot be used, and why it cannot be used in some cases. And Learning Labs are a space where we would like to share our processes that are very complicated, it seems like. I mean, I've been 2 years in utility learning all this lingo. We strive to be more accessible in Learning Labs, and it's going to be iterative. So today might be a little bit better than our last Learning Lab, and so on. We will continue having a technical venue in like our IRP roundtables, where we will interact with our stakeholders in a more technical fashion. In that technical venue, we're also striving to be more accessible, but the nature of those discussions are technical, and we would like you to participate also in a technical fashion there. The non-technical venue would be our Learning Labs. And okay, so we strive to be a one-stop venue for you, the audience, people participating in the clean energy plan, the distribution system plan, the multi-year plan, the transportation electrification plan. And we will be sharing planning initiatives and efforts. We would strive to, in order to have a space where we can have discussion and hear your feedback, cramming too many topics per meeting doesn't allow for that to happen. So we're like striving to find a happy medium of 2 to 3 topics per meeting, so we can create this space where we can discuss and hear your comments and thoughts about the work we're doing. And creating these workshops takes a lot of effort on our end, to be honest. I enjoy doing it a lot, and my team also enjoys doing it. So every 6 to 8 weeks is reasonable for us to be able to produce something that provides value to you and also to us. And as I mentioned, it would be 2 hours. The way that we have been evolving these tools to interact with you, we have a website that I will share. We have moved our meetings to Zoom. As you have requested us, it's a more user-friendly platform. And when needed, we'll be using Zoom polls or we would use some online whiteboarding when we are seeking for feedback on specific processes or surveys. And the way that we will be communicating with you, not to spam you too much on your inbox, is as follows. So after this meeting, we will have a follow-up meeting, a follow-up email, probably in about a week, where we'll be sharing with you the links that we would be posting on our website on this meeting. So for people that were not able to attend, this is another way for them to participate. And also to check past meetings. If you're interested in topics we've covered, our website is a great place to seek for that information. And we will be sending and save the date for our next Learning Lab date so that you can put it on your calendars. We've heard from some of you that you appreciate if we send you a calendar invite instead of just an email. So if you agree, or if you would prefer an email, please send us that feedback to learninglabs@pgn.com. And this is how our website looks like. So we have resource planning, and now we have consolidated the resource planning engagement for all our plans in one place, so that you don't need to go hunt on every page of every plan for what we've covered in our public process. You can see this. We have the plans. Why we encourage you to participate, and these are it's a library of past meetings so that you can access that information as well. So that was my quick update on Learning Labs, and I just wanted to check if anyone has comments or questions before we move to our next speaker. There's a question there. I see. Michelle.
Sorry, I have a little bit of background noise, so I apologize. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you okay.
Okay, great. So I have two questions. One, you had noted that you're trying to put in place a feedback or a mechanism for transparency on how you plan to use the feedback. I'm wondering, will this kind of be ahead of time, like letting folks know that you want feedback on this topic that you're about to discuss, but that this is where on the spectrum of engagement you plan for it to land? Or is it more kind of looking back, like, hey, we heard you say this, but we're only doing this? Or maybe is it both? That's my first question. And then my second question is, regarding having the non-technical and the technical spaces, I feel like it's a question and a comment, but I think it'd be good to have some transparency, or what is your transparency in terms of like what the technical definition is for you guys? Like, how are you going to be approaching the delineation between the two? Mm-hmm. And if a non-technical kind of participant does want to be in the technical space and then maybe asks a question that perhaps takes space but isn't specific to technical elements, I mean, would you defer them, or how would you handle that in the moment?
Great questions, Michelle. Well, let me answer the first one, and if anyone of my colleagues would like to jump in, also welcome to help me address this question, Michelle's question. In building this transparency mechanism, I think both, Michelle. We want to be thinking ahead of time on what are we going to be asking feedback on, and provide the framework, and so that people can prepare before a meeting. And then once we have collected the feedback via poll or like a survey or a mural board exercise, then share with you, our stakeholders, what did we hear, and what are things we can do, and what are things we cannot do, and if we cannot, why. And we started to use a mechanism like that for our IRP roundtables, and I think that I would like to test that with our learning labs, create a document that we share as a link over here, like probably like feedback, what we heard, and how are we planning on using or not the feedback, and why. I imagine it would be iterative, and until we arrive to something that it's decent for all of us. Did I answer your question?
Yes, that's great. I appreciate that. Just one follow-up. Would you be sharing this with the CBIAG as well?
Oh yeah, I mean, yes, we are very closely coordinated with the CBIAG as teams. Yeah. And your second question was on regard to, sorry, I'm like,
the technical versus non-technical.
oh, the technical versus non-technical. I think that there are ways that we can provide, like, if we, once we revamp our schedule and start meeting on our technical venue, create a feedback loop so that we don't have two silos. What did we talk on our technical venue to our non-technical venue, just to provide a space. But I think that in hearing your thoughts, we need to do some work internally to delineate that. And we'll bring that back to you and hear your thoughts. I absolutely agree with you. It's fair. We need to define what does that mean so that we all know. I appreciate your input on that. And Jan, you have your hand up. Would you like to add some to this question, comment?
Yeah, I think the kind of other piece, I agree with everything you said there, Shadia. I think the other piece is just to state that when we're talking about technical versus non-technical, what we're doing is that is our guidance, I guess our loose guidance around the audience and how we prepare content. And we're still, I think that we've talked about this kind of in the CBIAG update meeting, Michelle, is to say that like the challenge is always trying to understand what the appropriate level or depth of information that we're sharing. And so I think all of that to say that I think the next step is understanding what technical means, because we have that conversation internally all the time. So yeah, I think that we can take that action, and then Shadia, myself, and Samantha and our teams can kind of connect and figure out some next steps and get more specific on that.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions before we move to our next presenter? Well, thank you. I would like to introduce Elijah Lawrence. She will be our next presenter, and she would be speaking on our Transportation Electrification Final Plan. Welcome, Elijah.
Thank you, Shadia. Good morning, everyone. Great to be with you and to be able to talk through. So I'm Alicia Lawrence. I'm the Senior Manager of our Transportation Electrification team. And that is the team of individuals at PGE who are working to support our customers, from residential customers all the way through to business customers who want to support, all the way to fleet customers and what we call medium and heavy duty vehicle support for being able to help them electrify their fleet. So I want to talk today about what are all those different programs? What does it look like? Let's talk through what is our transportation electrification plan that we just filed. What's the strategy around why we did what we did? What's the budget? What makes up that budget? How does it work? Then we'll talk through those highlights of what is that? What is the transportation electrification plan? What are those highlights? What does it mean for our customers? We got to have a great engagement from our stakeholders and hear from a lot of you on what do you want to see different? And I want to be able to share what were those themes that we heard and how we incorporated that into our final plan. And then lastly, we'll talk about the procedural steps and what's coming up next. All right, so our strategy when back in 2019, when we set up our last plan, I was really thinking through how do we help our communities accelerate transportation electrification. We knew there was support there. We're seeing that transition is happening, that we're seeing higher and higher numbers of forecasts of EVs on the road, both EVs on the road now, but also forecasts in the future. And so we really thought through, there's really three pieces that we see of transitioning from accelerating is really like, let's start incorporating TE into our company. And what does that mean? What does that look like? And so it's really the first one step is plan. How are we making sure that we're planning for our energy needs for all of our different customers who want to electrify and join in this journey? So part of that is make sure, one of the things we hear about a lot is how do you make sure the grid is ready? Well, it's really making sure we're forecasting, that we've got the right data input so we can say, where is their EV load coming on? Whether it is for a residential customer who wants to install a charge at their home, a residential customer who is going to have multifamily charging at their location, a business customer who wants to make workplace charging available or public charging, really making sure we are getting in front of our customer needs so that we can anticipate how do we change how we build out our grid, but knowing where it's going to be at for those larger loads, so we can plan effectively for the future. And really thinking through part of that, knowing where that's going to be at is strategic decision making. So we know that it can take time to build out the grid. So make sure we have a really good idea about where are those larger loads coming in so that we can handle that extra demand from EVs and not slow down the pace of our customers' transition to electric vehicles. So that's what planning is, knowing where it's coming, being able to forecast that and making strategic decisions on how we build out our grid to support those coming electric needs. The second piece of our strategy is, so when you think about base business, we plan for the load and then we need to serve the load. So once it's here, how do we make sure that we're serving it right? And part of that serving is making sure there's an equitable transition. How do we make sure that there's equitable needs for whether you own your home to whether you may not own your home and have a place to be able to charge? So we want to make sure that we treat that need for our customers who need EVs, that is affordable, that it is reliable, and that it is safe electricity. But that also leads into making sure that we're serving is, do we have the right rate structures in place? Let's look at how do we have the right pricing plans, create those right pricing plans so that we can use electricity in those EVs. So we today have different rates and different tariffs for businesses, for residential customers, for different kinds of industries. So we're really going to be thoughtful about how we approach these moments where we can be with you all so that we can have transparency and communication. How did we do this rate development so that you all and our customers can know what are the different types of rates that we're looking to develop and what does that mean for them as they're looking to transition to an electric vehicle? And then part of serving is just make sure that our grid is there and that it's operating in a manner that helps supply energy at all times to our customers. So there's when a customer wants to create a new service with PGE, we do something called a line extension agreement. And it's saying, okay, we're going to help provide the power to you. Here's how much you're going to pay. Here's how much we're going to pay. We want to relook at what do line extension agreements look like when you're looking at adding EV load and knowing the forecast of growth in the future. When there's more and more vehicles that are planned to have the ability to be able to give energy back to the grid. So not only do they consume energy, but give it back. That's when something called an interconnection agreement we take place with the customer. So we know where is their energy that's coming back onto the grid and not just PGE supplying it to customers. So we really need to look at the interconnection agreements that we have and what does that mean as we have vehicles and chargers that allow you to put energy back onto the grid as well. And then lastly, as we want to make sure that we're understanding these different pieces and the different charging needs, we really need to make sure we've got the right data sharing agreements in place so we can get information from our chargers and from vehicles so we can understand where is their charging taking place, how does it look like, how does it ramp up, how does it ramp down, what does it look like for all the different types of use cases that are out there. So those are the things that we're really looking at on how do we integrate and modify those to make sure it's integrating transportation electrification and the energy needs surrounding those customers. Any questions? I just want to make sure that we can plan or serve. Not seeing any. Okay. So then if we plan for the load and we're serving the load, one of the unique things about TE and the strategy that we can have in place is that we can manage the load as well. And so that's our next strategy. Our next strategic focus is on managing the load. And so what managing looks like is that EVs need electricity, But there's also, for a lot of different EV owners, there's a lot of flexibility in when they can charge or when they need to charge. Not always is that the case, but more and more there is that need of thinking through how long does it take you to charge up your vehicle, whether you're a residential customer or a fleet customer. And when do you need to be able to use your car to be able to live the lifestyle that you have? And so it's really making sure, how do we be flexible and when customers use electricity, help provide rates as well as programs to help manage when the energy is needed for our electric vehicles. And then that second piece is really thinking through that. How do we have not just the rates, but how do we have programs that can talk to EVs and chargers? And that way we can really think through, how are we integrating where EVs are showing up and integrating it into the grid to create that flexibility on having charging going when there's a lot of renewable energy resources, when there's plenty of energy on the grid, and then making sure where can we slow down charging, where there's more energy needs outside of car chargings, and that vehicle has flexibility in when it needs to charge. So we have different programs that we've got going on. We've got a residential smart charging program that does this today for residential customers, and really looking at how do we expand that to other use cases so that we can help our customers and support their needs while also supporting our grid and the energy that's needed there as well. So that's the strategy. It's really around plan, serve, and manage the load, and then and what that means is just integrating TE into base business and into how a utility works. With transportation electrification, for those who are new, there's some different funding mechanisms that go into what kind of makes up the whole entire budget of the transportation electrification plan. So there's different programs and infrastructure measures, which is how the TE plan is structured. Infrastructure measures are just infrastructure measures are programs that are helping to build assets in the ground, supporting the underlying charging needs. And so there's 4 different things that go on there. So we've got that first category is called capital expenditures. And if you look down below, you can see the capital expenditures and the deferral operating expenditures. Those are traditional utility funds. They are how our rates are set. And so you've got capital, which is building that infrastructure or purchasing assets that are going to be being installed somewhere, being utilized some way or somehow. So it's called capital money. Operating money is really around how do you operate and maintain programs, as well as any assets that PGE owns as well. And those two, along with the monthly meter charge, are collected through customer bills. The monthly meter charge is unique to transportation electrification. It is collected through customer bills from all customers. This is, and it is specifically for funding transportation electrification activities. It's a charge that's required by state law, and it's 0.25% of total revenues for each customer goes into being able to fund these activities. So you'll see an acronym called MMC. That's that collection of money that has to go towards transportation electrification activities. And that money also needs to go towards our 50% of it needs to go towards our underserved communities to make sure that we're supporting that equitable transition to a clean energy future for vehicles. Lastly, we've got something that's not collected through our customer bills, and it is our Clean Fuels program. So Clean Fuels program is an Oregon DEQ program that's administered by PGE on behalf of our residential customers. How does it work? The money from this program is collected via credits sold on a wholesale market. It places a dollar value on the carbon content of transportation fuels. So there's different types of transportation fuels. And so for our residential customers or for other charging needs, you get so many credits based on how many customers have EVs and the carbon content of the transportation fuel. PGE sells those on the market, and that the funds from that is what funds our transportation electrification activities that must benefit our residential customers. Since the credits come from residential customers adopting EVs, we want to make the law also states making sure that we are benefiting our residential customers with how we spend those dollars. And so I talked to you that it is an Oregon DEQ program administered by PGE on behalf of residential customers. It's not included in customer bills. So those dollars are outside of what a customer would be charged on their customer bill. Just want to make sure that was clear of it's through a DEQ wholesale market that those funds are collected. Any questions on any of these? All right. then let's be able to talk through. So now we kind of know what those funding mechanism is. Now you can kind of get an overview of what do those dollars look like. So if you need to go back on slides, we can, but those colors for the different things also coordinate to the colors on this slide. So our 3-year plan, our transportation electrification plan, is the activities that are going to be going on in the TE space from 2023 through 2025. And it is 96 million total portfolio in order to plan, serve, and manage our transportation electrification. That also includes making sure we're providing that equitable access to charging. And so that clean fuels program that we talked through at the end, I'll just start with that one. On that right-hand side, you'll see that dark blue color. Those are the dollars that we're forecasting that we will receive based on the number of residential EVs in our service area, as well as the credit prices, the historical credit prices that we've seen in the past. So we're anticipating $45.3 million will be spent on the clean fuels program, and we can talk through that more. On the salmon colored down in the lower left-hand corner of the pie chart, you can see that's the monthly meter charge. So those are the funds that we're forecasting will come in from the charge on from all customer bills. It's that state required law that there will be about $23 million in the monthly meter charge budget that will fund the different programs. Some of our different products and programs we've already had, and we've gone before the PUC for approval of the different pilots and programs going on. And so that's that with that $17.8 million. It's a blend of capital and operating expenses. And so that is showing, here's the amount that has been approved by the commission in the past for the different activities that we've got going on. And then that $9.9 million is the incremental amount of capital and operating dollars that we're looking to spend is the ask from our customers. So of that whole $96 million portfolio, $9.9 million is those additional dollars that we're looking at for that would be collected through our customer bills. And so 58% of this whole portfolio of that $96 million is forecasted to be spent in underserved communities. And on the following slide, we're going to get into a little bit more about what does the underserved communities definition look like in transportation electrification. So from the time that we filed our draft plan towards now, we did make changes to the portfolio based on our stakeholder input, and we were able to maintain that draft portfolio. And our draft plan, our draft portfolio, we anticipated that we would have 0.15% customer rate impact across all rate classes. And we were able to maintain that same percent impact across all rate classes while making changes to our programs to support our customers. And so that 0.15% is linked to that 9.9 million is really what that is looking at, is what that looks like across all of our different customer classes. We'll get into a little bit more about what's contained within that 96 million, what are the different programs involved. All right. Not seeing questions. So then let's talk through. We said that 58% of our portfolio spend is on underserved communities. So underserved communities is really defined by the House Bill 2165, the same bill that instituted the monthly meter charge funding, also has a really great definition around what does underserved communities look like. So when you think about transportation electrifications, thinking through where are those portions of our communities where they will have a harder time transitioning, and how do we support them? So it's residents of rental housing, right? Making sure how are we supporting renters to be able to make that transition since they may not have full ownership of their property. Residents of multifamily housing, so dependent on property owners or on public charging and workplace charging. Communities of color, making sure we're making an equitable transition no matter where they live and who they are. And then part of that is communities experiencing lower income. Household income is less than or equal to 120% of the state median income, adjusted for household size, is how lower income is slated for underserved communities. This also includes tribal communities and our rural communities. And it also includes communities that are adversely harmed by environmental and health hazards. So certain emissions and what that looks like. Making sure that as we electrify transportation, that also helps clean up the gas emissions that are in that community as well. So there's a link down at the bottom of the page if you want to go out to the House Bill 2165 to look further into this. just want to make sure you can understand when we talk about underserved communities and transportation electrification, what does that look like and what does that mean? All right. So let's talk through that 58% of the portfolio funding that is going to be spent on underserved communities. What does that look like? What are the impacts that we're going to see? So this may seem just like, well, of course, but charging takes chargers, right? So you need to have a charger in order to charge a car. And without being able to have available chargers in your community, whether you are a renter or multifamily, it's really hard to consider switching to an EV. And so making sure that we are supplying more charging to the underserved community, more charging options, both in the public space, as well as potentially at their businesses, at workplaces, and at multifamily locations. Also, you need to make sure, how do you have infrastructure ready to use in your neighborhood? So you want to give you access and confidence that an EV can work for you. We hear a lot from our customers. I'm worried about the ability to charge. I'm worried about chargers that are going to work. So really making sure, let's solve that first problem of making sure that there are chargers ready for them. And so we've got chargers that we're installing in different neighborhoods to make sure that customers can have some confidence that they'll have charging near them and help support their transition. We want to make sure that with our utility support, we help enable the choice to change over, and can also attract other investment in TE infrastructure where today there's a low demand. So in some of these communities, they may not be the first places where public chargers will show up. We want to start showing up there so that others can see the need and the demand, and also the transition, and help instigate more investment in TE infrastructure in those communities. So we want to make sure that we don't, underserved communities aren't left behind in this EV transition, that they've got access to the charging and are able to participate. And so there is utility-owned chargers in that, and that we've been a community member for over 100 years. So you want to make sure that you can rely on us to maintain the EV charging infrastructure that we build out. We hear a lot about concerns about reliability, and wanting to make sure that we're showing up as a community member that's here to serve, and that we're here for the longevity. So I want to make sure we're providing infrastructure and charging solutions that work. And then also by installing those chargers ourselves and helping others install chargers, we are supporting that EV adoption and better air quality. There are some of our programs like Fleet Partner, where we're helping our customers provide some of the underlying infrastructure for our business customers who want to electrify their fleets. Well, as those customers electrify fleets in underserved communities, they are helping to create a better air quality solution for their community. And so making sure that we're supporting them so that they can support a cleaner environment for their communities surrounding them and where their fleets drive. And then we'll also be working with our charging companies and site owners to encourage charger installation and help keep charging affordable. We know that having charging infrastructure is a new line of work, I guess you would say, maybe as a property manager or as a business for workplace. I'm used to running my business. Now I'm needing to know more about, well, what does it mean to install charging infrastructure? We can help them understand what are all the different steps that are needed to do that. And then what does that mean when I look at the rates that I would be charged? And do I want to offer them for free? What would that impact look like? Or do I want to be able to charge a dollar amount? What would be the rate I can expect to be able to receive from PGE, so that we can help them know what does that look like to be able to keep things affordable for themselves and for their customers. So I want to be able to kind of share, what do the impacts of those dollars look like when we say that 58% of the portfolio would be forecast to be spent on those underserved communities. Questions? Okay. So we wanted to share with you, oh, thank you. Sherry?
Yeah, hi, I'm Sherry with Community Energy Project. And yeah, I just have some questions. And if you're going to answer this later on, just let me know.
Yeah.
I am curious about how, if PGE yet knows how you're going to say, choose the neighborhoods and the workplaces. Are you going off census data? Are you going off income qualified bill discount program data, that sort of thing? If you're going to think oh, I want to choose workplaces, for example, have you all figured out what your rubric is for choosing those places yet?
I think that's a great question, Sherry. So I think you're thinking about kind of like the business and the workplace charging. And then I can also talk about what are we looking at when we're looking at the PG owned chargers going out in the neighborhoods as well. And so we are still working on refining our rubric for the business and not more so the business and less so for the multifamily. So part of our program is about 12 different sites that would be supporting our public and workplace charging. So those businesses, really looking for where is there a community need, where is there less public charging available in a community, and especially as we look at underserved communities, we know we're going to hit about 60% of an underserved community with the public and the workplace. And so looking for those places where there might be lower income qualified, there might be other categories that are in the underserved communities, to make sure that we're looking for where is there maybe not a public charging solution, and then where have we heard interest, where there could be something for the public and the workplace charging. Really wanting to gain understanding from those different places to know what are the different solutions that would be needed for workplace charging, for public charging, for business customers. So we can think through what is our long-term rate and tariff transition that we need to make so we can move from a program infrastructure to more of a rate and tariff in the future. So just a smaller size of a pilot to really gain those learnings to look through what does that mean and what does that look like. So by choosing some not in underserved and some in underserved communities, hoping to gain those learnings to see, is there any differences as we think through different rates and tariff structures in the future for what that looks like.
So then I think that kind of leads into like the other part of the question I was going to have, which was around like evaluation and what you would do about it. So like if you were like, okay, we have this charging station, it's like barely being used, you know, versus this one that's like heavily used. Are you like, have you guys thinking about like what you would do to like increase engagement with a charging station, like with additional outreach or anything like that? And I'm also curious, like how, if you're planning to work on like with the CBIAG around some of these like kinds of problem solving, or like what would evaluation look like? What could outreach look like? What could that sort of thing look like?
Yeah, I love that, Sherry. So part of the transportation electrification portfolio is also working on engaging. We've got a long-term engagement strategy that we're working on with our underserved communities. And so we are getting that stood up now. So we're gathering kind of a different focus groups, I guess you could call them, but different working groups to really hear from community members, help them understand what are the different programs we're looking at, get their input. What do we need to do to engage with our underserved communities? How do we need to talk through our different programs? And then where can we help support if there might be low usage or different things? What does that look like? How are we making sure that we're structuring our programs and also reaching out to those community members, educating them, making sure outreach is really hitting the mark and being heard by those different, by the different segments of the underserved community. And so that is a part of how we're doing transportation electrification, is those it's really, it's where I think we're calling it long-term community engagement. If you were to look in our plan, really talking through how are we making sure that we're engaging and hearing from those community members so that we can really hit the right mark for our different products and programs.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Great question. All right. So folks, the major themes that we heard from our stakeholder comments. So we filed on June 1st. We had a workshop back in June, middle of June, and then we were able to see comments from July. We were able to have comments. We were able to have some meetings with people who requested different meetings to talk through their comments and brainstorm some solutions. I just want to thank all of our stakeholders so much for the level of engagement, the level of input that they provided, both in comments, but in also giving us additional time to talk through their concerns, hear their ideas, and be able to be thoughtful about what does that then mean as we look at our final plan. So I just wanted to say thank you. So I wanted to kind of bring back, what are the major themes that we heard? And then what are the changes that we made to the plan as a result? So one of the feedback themes is we had an expansion to our multifamily program in the plan for 24 and 25. And there's really concerned about how can we make sure that there's price parity at multifamily sites? So we're really thinking of how do we've said that there's going to be a competitive market that's going to help kind of keep prices even, but really concerns of what does that look like and how would we really see that play out, and worries that wouldn't occur. So part of what we did is we changed and we decided to, instead of expanding multifamily, we'll talk through this in a little bit, but we decided let's co-locate curbside charging. And what that means is we shifted our multifamily expansion funding to the municipal program. And I'll talk more what the municipal program is. And we shifted it from the multifamily additional 100 ports, and ports are just the number of cords on a charger, if you're not used to that terminology, but the number of ports from the multifamily expansion, and said, okay, let's, instead of expanding in multifamily, let's learn from the pilot that we have already out there. And then let's shift and learn a little bit more about what does it look like to the pricing of different chargers at multifamily sites if we co-locate any curbside ports near multifamily sites. Curbside port would just be a charger that's located on the curb of a street. We have pole chargers that we're expanding out in our communities. Pole chargers are one way of being able to expand into the different neighborhoods. We just know not all utility poles are located at the perfect locations for being able to serve underserved community needs. So then curbside charging is that way of being able to find those spots where it's going to be ideal for charging and for meeting an underserved community need, but without needing to be reliant on a pole to be there. And so we said, okay, let's co-locate those 100 curbside ports, those additional ones near multifamily sites, to see what a PG-owned charger would look like compared, and keeping that pricing and that competitive market pricing in play for the multifamily charging that's out there as well. So really wanted to learn more about what does that look like and how is the competitive market making an impact or potentially not on a multifamily charging solution. The second piece that we heard is really concerned about what would be the cost that property owners will charge for the multifamily residents. A lot of concerns about with multifamily residents, if they've got charging on at their location, how do we make sure that they're not having really high prices being charged to them, since it is at their home location where it's the easiest to charge. So part of what we did is we then changed our rebate structure. We thought, what could we do here? And so we did a tiered rebate to incent pricing. So we've got a business rebate program. And so we decided, let's do a same upfront rebate as our business rebate program. So $1,000 upfront, and that we would do an additional incentive in 5 years if prices remain within 10% of what is Schedule 50. And Schedule 50 is just PGE's price that we charge customers at PGE-owned charging. So if they would keep their prices within 10% of our Schedule 50, we would give them an additional incentive in 5 years to incent them to be able to keep their charger up and maintained, as well as any potential replacements they might need as well. So that was that was a solution we looked at to say, how do we make sure that we're incenting them to keep prices reasonable for their customers? Lastly, Schedule 50, which I said, so that's at PG-owned chargers, we've got, it is, right now it is a flat rate. It is $3. So if it's what we have is a level 2 charging, and level 2 charging is the same type of charging. It takes a little bit longer. It can take anywhere between like 6 to 12 hours, depending on your battery size, to fill up your car. That's the type of charger a resident, a person who owns their home could install in their garage to have a higher level of charging, like the same amount of energy that your dryer uses. They can put that into their charger. So we have those installed throughout our service area. You'll see quite a few different businesses do as to their level 2 chargers. So we charge $3 for a level 2 charger for 2 to 4 hours. And then we've got a peak price as well. And so, oh, I see Carolyn. I just want to kind of share a little bit more what's Schedule 50, and that we heard mixed themes between concerns on equity to concerns on market rates. Carolyn.
Hi, thank you for this presentation. I didn't mean to cut off your discussion of Schedule 50, but I just have a quick question about the multifamily cost to charge and the tiered rebate to incent pricing. Is that a one-time incent at the 5-year mark? The contracts for multifamily are 10 years. Is that correct still? Okay.
That's correct still, Carolyn. So
Okay.
It is a 10-year contract, and it would be only a one-time incentive at that 5-year mark.
Okay. Do you know what that incentive value is?
Yeah. So Carolyn, it's $1,000. I think we had proposed in our current business rebate structure, we've got a $2,300 rebate for multifamily. And so
Okay.
we do $1,000 up front and then the $1,300 at that 5-year mark.
Okay. I think you shared that. So thank you for that recap.
Okay. Yeah. Glad you asked. Thank you. Thank you for keeping me, because I want to make sure we keep to the questions that might be out there for multifamily.
Yeah, thanks, Alicia. You've got about 10 minutes left on your side. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, Guy. So for Schedule 50, it's that right now a $3 flat rate for 2 to 4 hours. And so really thinking through how do we heard concerns from people as we're looking at revamping Schedule 50 instead of it being a flat rate, moving to a per kWh charge. That's where the market is at really now, is really looking at those different types of charging structures. Just those concerns on how to make sure it's equitable to customers who don't have access to charging at their home, as well as concerns on making sure that we're keeping with our market rates. So though we're not ready for a proposal of what Schedule 50 is going to look like right now, we did want to include what are those future rate design principles that we are looking at. And so we did include those in the plan so we could be really transparent about what are the things we are considering. And so one of the things that we're considering that for level 2, how do we make sure that level 2 is that same level of charge that you could have at a residential home as well as out in the public. So how for level 2, making sure that it is equitable to what a residential rate would be for a customer who owns their home and can install charging at their home. DCFC is that faster charging that you may have heard of. And so that's where it can take, it's right now our rate is $5 for a 2-hour time period at a fast charging location. And then there's additional if you use it during peak hours. So we will be evaluating those mid-market rates and also be determining options for our low-income customers that may not have the availability of installing charging at their home. So really looking through what are the right solutions to make sure that we're supporting DCFC as well as our low-income customers who might be more reliant on that DCFC charging. Carolyn.
Thank you. Just one more follow-up question about the 10%. For multifamily, they're likely to have a maintenance fee on top of the electricity cost. So in your experience, is that 10% roughly around the cost of the maintenance fee? Or have you seen maintenance fees that are higher or lower?
We've seen maintenance fees that could be a little bit higher, could be a little bit lower. What we also thought through for the 10% is really what we thought would be reasonable and thinking through what that pricing could be potentially for maintenance. And so that we've seen varying degrees of what maintenance can look like, but really meant to help make sure we could cover that without being too exorbitantly high or lower than our Schedule 50. Okay. We also need to maintain and operate our own chargers as well.
Thank you for that.
Welcome. So I think the key priorities is just kind of reiterating our strategy and what that looks like. So I want to make sure you can see what does the planned budget look like as we look at that 96 million. So activities 1 through 8 are those different activities that are being funded through our customer rates. And then down below, the one starting with grants and infrastructure through public charging municipal those are the ways that are looking to spend the clean fuels dollars. So though you may not have seen the plan or read each program, I want to kind of give an example of, so here's the activity that we're talking about and what does that look like? What are some examples of what that would support? So for Fleet Partner, when we say make ready rebates for fleet customers, it's just the underlying what's called switchgear, but that all the conduit and equipment that's underneath of a charger that helps support a customer. The customer will own and select their own chargers, but will help them set up the right infrastructure underneath as long as they purchase a qualified charger. So that's what Fleet Partner is. For public charging, make sure we got that charging on those utility poles in residential areas near those multifamily units and in areas of low income and others. That we also have the residential smart EV charging. So we give an incentive for a qualified charger, or if they sign up using their car that has a telematics program that can do managed charging. Heavy duty, so it just kind of talks through the different examples, and then really looking forward. When you think about, when we talk about that 58% of that equity, that public charging for municipal and electric avenue is really where we're investing heavily to make sure that we're supporting those underserved community needs. So you can see that $13.7 million up top is really making sure we're supporting those underserved communities, as well as at the very bottom, using those clean fuel dollars to also help support curbside charging near those multifamily units as well. So I wanted to honor the time, make sure I'm giving enough time and space for everyone to contribute. And then down in the clean fuels dollars, we've worked a lot with stakeholders on how those dollars are spent. So I just want to kind of give an idea. When we talk about grants and infrastructure, it's different community, nonprofit projects that can apply on a grant. It's electric school buses, helping our school districts transit pay the difference between what a combustible engine bus pays compared to an electric school bus, and helping them kind of bridge the difference between those different costs, and making sure we have better underserved community outreach. We've seen a lot of ride-in drives being helpful for customers to understand what does it look like to own an EV, how do they work, and then other residential education campaigns. And then lastly, there's a lot going on in this arena and in this space. And so I really want to make sure we understand what's the emerging technology that's coming out. A lot of vehicle to grid that's being talked about. A lot of people talk about the vehicles providing energy back to the grid. We just know that technology is really new and nascent. So we really want to test it out and make sure we understand where is it ready, where are there still some challenges, and what do the timings look like for being able to move forward. So that's kind of the whole of the TE plan, and being able to talk through where are those different dollars going at, and that some of those activities are sunsetting. So there's a couple of our programs, the business EV charging rebates that we didn't ask for an expansion of in the plan, as well as the EV ready affordable housing grants, which is helping to pay for the changing regulations in the affordable housing industry on how many parking spaces need to be EV ready when new sites are built. All right, so I know, okay, just want to make sure, are there questions? I sorry to rush through this a little bit, but just want to make sure we can understand what the activities look like that we talk about when we talk about the TE plan.
Okay, we do have a question in chat. And this is from Eric Stride. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. RMI and others have shown that chargers for fleets are much cheaper if built out for the full fleet configuration, at least with EV ready stalls, versus incrementally adding chargers. To what degree is such a dig once strategy superior to LDV chargers, whether for DCFCs or multi-unit dwellings, etc.?
Right. And so I think Eric, you're making a comment is exactly how we've built our fleet partner plan. Is how do you make sure that you're building out for the full fleet? And we have agreements, that's a 10-year agreement with our fleet partner customers. And so helping them think through what is the whole of their needs as they think through charging of the future. And I think there is similarity as well as when you think through multifamily. I think the portion that we want to be considerate of as well is making sure that we're also seeing that the market is ready. And so that's partly what we want to be able to learn about and think about, that as we've learned from kind of fleet, what are the different types of being able to build out in parking lots that can look like. I think for multi-unit dwellings, that's why the codes have changed for EV ready. It's affordable housing and making sure you got EV ready parking spaces. Where we see the need for our ability to invest and help support is in multi-unit dwellings that are already here and already settled. And so making sure we can learn from them on what does that look like. We want to be able to say, what are the different construction patterns and needs need to be for those communities? Where is there the right balance between building out for a full fleet, which we know will take time for multifamily dwellings, as well as making sure that we're investing so it's not having to dig up the ground every 2 to 3 years. So really making sure we're thinking through the right timing of that, where I think fleets have a lot more control and thoughts around when they're going to be purchasing vehicles. Multifamily units is a lot more dependent upon making sure that the units come to them, but making sure that we're building a little bit more than what they see right now so that we can help make sure they're not having to dig up multiple times within the next few years.
Eric, does that answer your question?
Yes, somewhat. It would seem like you could take a whole small city and plan out everything and know where your load is going to be and where the distribution needs to be. Is that because we know by about mid 2040s everything's going to be electrified just due to advanced clean cars. So why don't we just plan for 100% electrification, I guess is the question.
Gotcha. It's really making sure, Eric, that we're learning what we've seen already in the charging space is that the conduit is the same, switchgear is similar, but you got to make sure you understand what are the different, how many spaces, what are the different needs and the different type of transformers as well. We're just seeing a lot of changes in even the technology of how much power is each charger going to be able to need to be able to charge. The charging speeds of chargers, the technology of the chargers are still changing, as well as the changing needs of the vehicles that are being charged. How big are the batteries? How fast can they accept speeds? And so that's the piece that is a little bit harder to predict when you're looking at multifamily and public, is really thinking through those longer term needs and making sure we're spending our capital money in the timeframes in which it will be really used and useful, knowing that we've got that advanced clean energy. We just see that there's some time to be able to be thoughtful about how do we build out and where do we balance where we build out to support all of our different customer needs.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Appreciate the engagement, everybody. Anything else? All right, I'll give a few minutes. I think we're close to time. We're over a little bit, sorry, y'all. So we here just want to make sure y'all knew, what does this look like when we look at the procedural timeline coming up. So this is talking through what's the timeline since when we submitted our draft plan. We had some other workshops and other things that submitted. So on June 1st, we submitted our plan. We got to hear public comments from June through August. So appreciate that. You can still submit comments if you've got them. PG, we did modify and file our TE plan, our final TE plan in response to those comments 2 Fridays ago on August 25th. So this is where we're at right now. Our PUC staff is going to be posting a memo of recommendation to the commission that should be coming out on September 15th. Then from September 15th to the 29th, we all get to see what was that recommendation, what does that look like, and be able to take comments on staff's recommendation until September 29th. At that moment, then they'll be gathering them so that they can prepare for the public hearing and a commissioner work session where the plan will be reviewed, and there will be, I think, a vote on approval or modification. So that's just so you can understand what does the timeline look like in the coming months and the different places where you've got moments to be able to really provide your comments as well as attend public hearings. So that's what we look like for transportation electrification. Thank you all for your engagement. Appreciate the input on both comments as well as the input today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alicia. Great presentation. Great. Thank you for all the feedback and comments. Let's take a quick, let's say, 4-minute break since we're a little bit over, but I think would be great for everyone to stretch your legs. So we will be meeting back at 11:11. There you go, 11:11. That sounds good. See you in a little bit. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a moment to stretch your legs and get that brain refreshed for our next presenter. I would like to welcome my colleague, Bean Liu. She will be talking about flexible load journey and initial costs. Please take it over.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. Really appreciate you taking some time. So my name is Bin Liu. For those of you who haven't met me yet, I am the Consumer Energy Solutions Manager here at PGE. So my team, we focus on helping to scale residential program and services, mostly in the flexible load space. So if we could go to the next slide, please. I only have a couple of things that I want to do today. So we'll do some refresh of the flex load concepts that we covered last month. And then I wanted to share some research that we had done in 2022 around some initial costs or first costs and barriers and what we're exploring about how we can help address it. And then I wanted to have a little bit of a discussion around the different ways that we're looking to address it. Okay, so if we could go to the next slide, just a refresher, right? So flexible load, those are ways that people can change how they can use energy based on what the grid needs are. So if you need a deeper refresh, Jason saw my class, I think 2 learning labs ago, he had done a really great 101. So I would recommend you looking at the library and checking that out. But you know, flexible load is really important to PGE because it helps us as we chase our carbon reduction goals, and it helps us rely less on traditional power plants, right? That engagement with the community is important. Now, I introduced last month the concept of customer journeys. So customer journeys is the roadmap of experiences that customers are taking as they identify their wants and their needs, and from the beginning, right? So from the first time they hear about something all the way through to them become happy supporters and all of the different offshoots of that journey that they could have. Now, customer journeys is really important for program developers like myself. Program developers like myself, because customers have to acquire and participate to be a useful resource in for the grid, right? So we want to make sure that that experience from end to end is really good for customers, so that they can have a great experience. Okay, so if you could go to the next slide. One of the assumptions that we have is that there's a large challenge for customers. They're facing as they try to acquire energy efficient, flexible load, resilient devices, anything within that kind of broader chasm of devices. And it's centered around the initial cost. So sometimes you'll also hear it stated as first cost or upfront cost, right? What that really breaks down into is the initial equipment cost plus the installation cost. So that is not the same as total cost, which you'll also hear folks in the industry say. Total cost assumes that you've accounted for rebates, incentives, tax credits, anything like that. But this is centered around like that from the time that you're purchasing it, what is that first dollar that you have to shell out? So that is our assumption that we're gonna kind of walk through the rest of this presentation on. So could you go to the next slide, please? So what did we do as we looked at this assumption, right? We actually mined some of the research that we've done. I know, shocking. So PGE in 2022, we had conducted a community work group with our smart grid test bed. So this was a series of engagement that the community had done with us. And this is just a series of selected comments as related to first cost and kind of flexible load in general, right? So just starting from the top, you know, historically excluded communities, there was a lot of conversation around the fact that they do get excluded from designs of programs traditionally, and that they should be considered at the beginning. So what are their specific challenges? What are their specific barriers? If we're looking for an inclusive program, we need to take that into account. The second one was that, you know, any cost, no matter how small, is a barrier for folks below medium income. Now that out loud, that seems like a duh, right? Like, oh yeah, PGE, that should be kind of obvious. But if you think about it, when we build programs at the very beginning, we're starting with the innovators, those early adopters, folks that have a little bit more affluence. And as we're moving through that adoption curve that we talked about in the last learning lab, this comment actually has to be considered pretty heavily, right? How do people think about cost? How is that a barrier? How big is that cost, right? Then we've hit some perceptions that, you know, were known, but it was good to hear. A lot of people have felt that, you know, participating in these energy efficient, flexible load, resilient devices, they're just for the rich and powerful, right? I'm not rich, I'm not powerful. Why should I go and try to chase those things? And, you know, what was interesting too is when people talked to us, they had said, you know, even if I can afford it, I'm just making other people rich. So why should I continue to do that? Why should I pursue those things? So that's been an interesting perception that we have to figure out how to overcome as we bring our communities along with us in this flexible load journey. And then the last one was around lack of financing. That was a theme that kept getting echoed. You know, customers in these vulnerable communities, they lack a lot of the traditional financing methods that we kind of take for granted. And then on top of that, it was very, there's a little bit more burden to that, right? So time intensive to go research, to understand what the information is, how to make the decisions around financing that is available to you. There's a little bit more burden when it comes to it for the vulnerable communities. So what we did is we said, great, this is a good first stepping stone of research information that we got. We wanted to do a little bit of a deeper dive. So if we could go to the next slide, I'm gonna walk us, actually, can I go back one? I'm sorry, I'm rushing through. Just wanted to see, is there any comments, questions on this before we move to some more research that we did? Okay, thank you. All right, so let's get to the next slide. So what we did last September is we commissioned a rapid needs assessment. So we at Commission, We All Rise, it is a local nonprofit that does research of this type. They helped us better understand some of these research objectives that we were looking for, right? How do low and lower middle income customers, homeowners specifically, so we didn't take a look at multifamily, think about money in general? How do they think about budgets, needs, and constraints? Because all of that factors into whether or not you buy a product or not. How do they think about paying for repairs, upgrading, what happens when emergency purchases have to get made? And then what is that calculus of how do they make the decisions? How do they research that information, right? And then for our purposes for the rapid needs assessment, we called everything energy efficient products because it was a little bit easier than trying to explain flexible load, resilient, the nuance between all of them. But the way that customers had talked to us, they actually lumped all of them in together. So when you see energy efficient in the rest of the slides, that's what that means. So how do they think about those and as it relates to the rebates that are available? So we got back 6 research results from the rapid needs assessments, and we're going to step through each one of them. Okay, so next slide, please. So the first one is finances are challenging. So on the right-hand side, you're going to see those other quotes that we were able to pull directly from customers. And it is really good to know that these customers, there were, we had basically had 4 focus groups that commented on these, this conversation that we had with them. One of them was entirely Spanish speaking, and we focused on not just the metro. We did the outskirts of the service territory as well. We made sure that We All Rise indexed on trying to get folks that were part of those vulnerable communities. So we had a good mix of different ethnicities and from various parts of the zip codes. So for the financing are challenging, right? Customers, We All Rise had kind of raised the flag to us that, you know, within PGE service territory, there is a significant portion that is considered lower income. Within that lower income space, those communities have limited or no ability to save, right? So with that, hey PGE, that makes it much harder for them to go and buy those energy efficient appliances, those resilient, flexible load appliances, right? And then as they talked to customers more, they peeled back the layers around like, what are those institutional barriers that is happening as it relates to financing, right? We talked a little bit about some of that upfront. Access to credit. We heard that in the Smart Grid Testbed community work group. It's echoed back here. Access to information in languages beyond English was resonated quite frequently and across multiple languages, right? Not just our Spanish speaking customers, but folks of speaking other languages also raised that as a barrier. And then what was interesting was that sometimes when that information does come in the other languages, it was overly simplified. So they couldn't actually get enough information to really understand, how do I make it a good decision, right? And you know, the quotes that we're getting, they helped us resonate of like, okay, what do we have to take into account as we design some of these programs? That customer experience, right? That top one around the top right, where the customer said, I had to take a loan just to be able to install air conditioning, or that bottom one where the customer has to really keep in mind the temperature in their home because their daughter has asthma, and every time she has to go to the hospital, it adds on more costs that they have to then deal with, right? So better understanding that was really important to us. If we move to the next slide, price is often a barrier. That's known within the industry. What was also really interesting was that they knew that everything was better for them, less costly in the long run, healthier for the environment. So it's not as if folks don't know, right? They know it, they just don't know how to access it, or they can't afford to access it. When we peeled back and had We All Rise ask a little bit more of like, okay, well, if you can't afford it, what is your next option? Understanding that they settle for secondhand or go to donated and used. Oh, that's really interesting as we think about flexible load and how do we get customers into these programs, right? We have to better understand that kind of secondary used good market. And then the inability to finance without credit history, kind of even beyond our industry, it is known that customers that don't have traditionally, folks in lower incomes traditionally don't have a credit history. And then what was also really interesting to hear was that the interest on loans that they can qualify for. So there's a lot of loans that they get exposure to that are, no interest for the first year, but then they quickly become predatory and outlier years. And then what happens if you miss a payment, right? So all of those things customers had said to us, well, I get really nervous about that. And so I don't really want to go do those things, which is a legitimate concern, right? Especially as you think about, how do I pay for these devices? And then there's a lot of comments that we received around, I get misjudged a lot being low income. People misjudge that I don't understand, that I have a lower education, X, Y, Z about me. And then that affects my ability to get certain type of loans, right? So these are things that, this one in particular, are things that our folks that currently participate in our programs, those early adopters, those innovators, they don't really have to face as a barrier, right? So if we could go to the next slide. And then, just in these last three, they're really interested in saving. So they're really interested in understanding the incentives, the rebates, the tax credits. That is very similar with everybody that participates in our programs. They want to know, how do I optimize my savings? And then they want to understand, like, what does the technical information mean, right? These last two, the yellow and the white. How do I understand what any of this actually is supposed to mean to me? What I found really fascinating was one of the comments came up about the yellow tag. So if you go to Home Depot, there's like a yellow tag on a bunch of different appliances. And I took it for granted that I understood what the yellow tag meant. I understand that if I look at it, that yellow tag is going to tell me certain things about efficiency, how much money I can save, things like that. And we had community members that said, like, I don't understand what that yellow tag means. It actually makes me more confused. So I don't always take into account anything that it says. And I might not be buying, I recognize that I might not be buying the most efficient products that I could be out there, right? And then the technology itself, right? How do I go ask about the information? We had a lot of comments from our community about solar. How do I make the right investment decisions for myself around solar? And they were interested in how do I pair that with some of the other home improvements that I would need to make for myself, right? So I'm going to pause here for a second. Are there any kind of questions or comments about some of the research that we've done so far?
I don't see anything in the chat, but feel free to take yourself off mute or throw your hand up or drop a question in there. Here we go, Sherry. Just a question. Research looks really thoughtful and lines up with our experiences too. Oh, it's a comment. Thank you so much.
Great. That's awesome. You know, it's really great when you have an assumption and your research echoes it and it gets echoed in multiple places, right? We've been working really hard in the last couple of years to make sure that when we do research that we're not asking the exact same question, but we're asking maybe a different flavor of the question and that we're getting kind of a more holistic 3D view of the situation. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So what does that mean? When we took all of this research that we've done in the last year, so it could we go to the next slide, please, Shadia? Thank you. So it reiterated to us that this assumption is correct, right? This initial cost is still a huge barrier for customers. And it doesn't matter what the income level you are is, right? It's still a thing that people have to think about. And then when we take into account the energy efficiency rebates, the flex load rebates, the tax credits, you know, those things are great. They're available, but they don't do anything to address first cost, that initial cost, right? So what do we do now? We had a lot of discussions of what do we do? So if we go to the next slide, we started brainstorming different ways that we can address initial cost. Now I want to do some caveats here. In this brainstorm that we did not assume that we're going to do anything different than what the CAP agencies do. So if you are a low income customer and you can qualify for free installations and upgrades through the CAP agencies, great. We don't want to support you through PGE. We want to send you through the CAP agencies. If you can get something through Energy Trust's Savings Within Reach programs, great. Let's go send you to those offerings, right? But then there's a whole slew of other segments of customers that either can't or just barely make enough money to not qualify, but they still need support, right? Sherry?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, like, there are lots and lots of people that qualify for, say, CAP agency services, but but it can't actually get in.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's important to be like, you might qualify for something. Like I work with people like that. I'm like, oh, you should go, you know, to Multnomah County Weatherization. They're like, oh, I've tried. I can't pass their income verification processes, or I can't, it doesn't, you know, there are barriers, or I have suspicion with the count. I have bad experiences with that entity. So I just want to like throw out there, like, cautioning, just because you qualify for something, like, have a little more conversation, because that person might be like, yeah, technically I do, but I still can't get the service.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great point, Sherry. So we've actually wrestled with what do we do with that space, right? Because we want to help support customers and push them to the areas where they could get it for free. Because if you could get it for free, we shouldn't try to make you pay for it. But we've heard a lot from customers saying, like, to your point, Sherry, I've tried that avenue and it wasn't successful for me. What else can you help me with? And so we're trying to find that balance. And maybe, Sherry, as we explore this more, we probably need to come back and talk to you and your team about, you know, are we is this customer experience, right, of like, for those folks, going to be helpful or not helpful? Yeah, thank you. We'll definitely circle back with you. So what we did is we broke it down to 4 different categories, right? Equipment and installation costs, rebates and incentives at purchase, third-party financing, and third-party savings. So we'll just walk through them one by one. So equipment and installation costs, there's a couple things that we think that we can help you with, right? Can we educate you on installation choices that make expenses go up? So if you were here in the last learning lab, I'd walked through the EV charging customer experience, right? So we know that if we educate a customer to say, if you want to have the most affordable installation for an EV charger, put the EV charger within 5 feet of the electric panel. That is a great way for them to factor that those expenses in, right? So if you decide that you need it further out than 5 feet from the electric panel, the installation costs are going to go up. I wish I had known that when I chose where to put my EV charger. I know other people would never know that that's a thing either. It's kind of just an industry secret. Let's open this industry secret. The other thing that we are looking into is, are there ways that we can work with the installers, not necessarily to set price, because we want to be able to let price kind of flow with whatever the market needs to do, but can we help set kind of boundaries or bands, right? So we're not, if we're helping you connect with an installer, you know that you're getting a quality install within a fair pricing band. The other thing that we looked into is rebates and incentives at purchase. So, the Energy Trust does a great job of having upfront, or I'm sorry, not upfront rebates, point of sale rebates. So those are kind of things that are upstream through the installer, the manufacturers. PGE doesn't actually do that. We give them after the fact. So can we pull some of our rebates upfront? Can we change the experience and give them at purchase? There's a little bit of risk on our part that we need to kind of work out, because there is the risk that you get the product and then you don't participate in the program, which is a concern, and we're trying to figure out ways to reduce that risk. And then we're also looking at how are ways that we can successfully stack all of the rebates and incentives for customers, right? Specifically the Energy Trust ones, anything with the manufacturers that they're doing, anything that installers are doing, let's stack it up front for the customer and bring down that initial cost as much as possible. And then third-party financing, what we've heard a lot from customers is, this is great. I still have no idea who do I go to go get a loan? Do you go to the bank to get a loan for an EV charger? I have no idea. That's what we've heard from a lot of customers. Or even about water heating, right? People generally know you could get a loan for batteries, HVAC, those bigger tens of $1,000 purchases, but not necessarily the smaller thousands of dollars purchases. So, we've heard from customers around, can you try to work with a lender who will look beyond the credit score? We've done some research in that, and we've understand that when you are just looking at credit score, it's not an equitable indicator of credit worthiness. Okay, great. How do we think about that? Hi, Tim.
Hi, Ben. Thanks for pausing. I'm just curious on the financing piece. Has the
Yeah.
utility ever seriously looked at not just on-bill repayment through a third party, but on-bill finance, actually leveraging utility capital and making investments that's meter tied and sort of able to sidestep credit worthiness because it's going to be tied to the meter long term, et cetera? Just curious if that's a pathway we could go talk about.
Yeah, we're exploring on-bill financing today. We haven't figured out how we'd want to tie it to a meter, because that kind of proves a little bit more tricky challenges, right? What we've explored today is third-party financing through a credit union that you would pay through your PGE bill, and the loan is still tied with the credit union. Right now, we've explored unsecured loans, and we're looking at other types of loans to explore as well. So are you thinking, Tim, that you'd be really interested to hear an exploration of loans tied to the meter?
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons to look at the meter is sort of the credit worthiness versus the property, particularly for renters, and really just, you know, folks can make a good decision for the moment, but it's really hard, especially if you're, you know, there's household instability, or even you just, you know, most people don't think on a more than
Yeah.
a 5 or 10 year horizon. If you're able to tie it to the meter or the property versus the individual occupant, it kind of opens up to new possibilities. But I was also talking about actually leveraging like utility dollars to make those investments instead of trying to secure through a, you know, a third party like a credit lender. So
Oh,
that's
I
something
see.
that's something that was talked about in, you know, probably a decade ago, and has had traction in some places. I just was
Yeah.
curious if that was on the menu.
Okay, so could I just make sure I understand that one? Are you thinking that like you're kind of getting the loan from the utility itself, that we're the
That's what
backer?
that's where I'm going. Yeah.
Okay. So right now the utility or PGE, it doesn't have quite an appetite to be the backer. I think we're nervous about getting into a secondary regulated space, right? Because banking and lending is a whole different regulation. But
Yeah.
I will bring it back up to folks so that we could explore again now that kind of the space is changing. Hi, David.
Hi there. I just wanted to follow up on Tim's comment there and ask, point out that using the utility capital instead of some other third-party capital for the loan, that has really been developed under the name, pay as you save or pay. And, there's several groups that have done a lot of work over that now over the last probably close to 10 years. And where I think I've seen the most uptake around the country is actually in like small public electric utilities.
Oh, interesting.
Have been taking advantage of it. So yeah, I would look into that model because there's actually some organizations that you could work with, and I think you don't have to be the servicer. You would be the capital source, but you wouldn't be the servicer. So simplify what your roles and some of what your exposure might be in terms of understanding another line of business. Then the other thing I wanted to ask is, in the past, I know with the on-bill loans that got started back with the Clean Energy Works program.
Yeah.
CRAFT 3 was the local community development finance institute, CDFI, that PG ended up working with to make that work. And I did hear, subsequently from PGE staff that, in the future, just because that integration was difficult, to get worked out, that more than likely, if this was to take place in the future, like with credit unions, they were still going to use CRAFT 3 on the back end, like as servicing. And
oh, interesting.
Customers could have a credit union on the front end, because if they're already working with a credit union or something like that. But just I would encourage you to look more at that to see, have times changed in terms of, can you have more servicers? But not delay in terms of, if you could work with one CDFI to be a back end servicer for a bunch of credit unions, or other CDFIs, again, you're taking advantage of infrastructure that's already there. So you don't need to start from scratch again.
Yeah, that's great to hear. We actually did a lot of studying of the Clean Energy Works program, I guess, because there was a lot of lessons to be learned on all sides, right? The customer, the utility, the lender. Last year we did some informational interviews with credit unions that had been part of the Clean Energy Works program, just regionally. And they gave us some really good tidbits of oh, if you do this, you should do this, this, and this, because it made it a lot easier. A lot of it was centered around difficulty of data between the utility and the lender themselves, like that past back and forth. I think technology has changed quite a bit. That might help us out, make it a little bit less difficult for everybody. I had actually not heard that PGE had a stance of using Craft 3 if we were to do something like this again as a backer, but I can take a look into that. Do you know of any particular team or person that we could circle back with?
The staff that I talked to are no longer there.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But I would double check, because I believe, to this day, the only organization that can service the online repayment is still Craft 3. So when the other banks were active before, they weren't actually handling the on bill portion of it. It was all going through Craft 3.
Oh, I see.
So, but I think if you were to approach it more systematically, like, you could clean up the concerns of the credit unions.
Yeah.
By approaching this, if Craft 3 was just kept basically on the back end, not necessarily on the front end. And, they're still the ones that are handling this. We're for savings within reach customers through Energy Trust of Oregon, who do the on-bill financing. And I know Tim just put a comment in the chat that, right now Craft 3 has been organizing conversations at the regional level, combining Oregon and Washington, about potentially providing, additional like common back-end services for federal funds that would be coming in.
Oh, okay.
So anyway, this would be an alignment, if you were talking to them about being a back-end service provider, for other lenders. Be on the front end.
Okay. That's great to know. And I will say, y'all, the lending is it's a whole new regulatory space to learn. So I appreciate all the advice that we could get of some practices that have been happening in the past, so we could study it. So I had taken that down. We'll take a look at those pieces. The other thing that we heard from our community was that, hey, can you team up with some lenders that have very low or no extra charges? That would be great. And then is there a way that we could help streamline repayment through regular bills, right? So I think, Tim, you had indicated like paying on a PGE bill. We've heard that in the past from other folks like Nia from NWEC. Other stakeholders have commented, this would be a good thing. The other thing that we want to explore, but not sure if that's a space that we want to delve into, is the third-party saving, right? So kind of my dream would be, can we help customers figure out a way to save for these devices that can also help improve their credit while they're engaging with PGE? Not really sure what that looks like, not really sure what that really means, but something that I'd like to explore. Shadia, could you go to the next slide for me, please? So yeah, what I'm really interested in hearing is, are we missing anything? Any other ways that you'd like us to explore first cost for low and moderate incomes? And then is there any other considerations you'd like us to explore for third-party financing or third-party savings? Okay, well, in that case, hi, Tim.
I was trying to type it in the comics. I don't want to take too much space, but
You're fine.
Sherry will probably weigh in or maybe agree with me on this, but generally Multnomah County, when it comes to lending for lower income households, just being very, very cautious about that approach, and just the possibility there could be any more any risk, or the possibility of leaving people worse off as a result of kind of saddling with debt. Combined with the complexity of trying to underwrite, some populations or households versus just being straightforward and getting money out the door through grants and just zero cost solutions. So just a
Yeah.
caution there, particularly for lower income. But I think there are some really creative ways of shouldering the risk, as a pool that, you can look to the utility or ratepayers or even a municipality to help shoulder some of the risk away from the individual household. I think that's an interesting thing for us to look at. So, but thanks for
Okay.
this great presentation.
Yeah, thanks for the comment. I would love to explore that more because I do think that, within our service territory, we're very fortunate. There's a lot of entities that exist to help support folks. And then I think some of my job and my team's job is to try to figure out what are the segments of folks that we can actually help support versus elsewhere, right? Sending them off to a different experience. So yeah, any other comments? If you do have anything later on, feel free to email the Learning Lab at pgn.com. Love to hear from you. And then, so Shadia, if you could go to the next slide for me. This is what we're going to do next, right? So now that we've had a little bit of discussion, taken a lot of that research, we're going to explore more of these third-party financing and third-party savings considerations this quarter. My plan is to come back in Q1 and let y'all know, what we explored, what was feasible, what was not feasible, and why. Just kind of knowing that we're going to splice out, the different shades of low and moderate income in that piece. And then the intent would be we would pursue and release something as a customer journey in the 2024 cycle. All right. Any other questions, comments, concerns before I pass it back to Kai, or I guess Shadia?
Tim, you still have your hand up. Was that from the last question, or did you have any? Okay.
Nope, I'm good. I'm sorry about that. Thanks.
No, you're great. All right. Thank you, folks. Really appreciate your time and all the considerations. Have a good rest of your day. And pass it back to Shadia.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Vin. And I think we have arrived to the end of the meeting. So I'll pass the microphone to my colleague Kai, and he will walk us through next steps and closing remarks.
Okay, great. If I get next slide, please. Great. Thank you. We had significant discussion here today, and do appreciate everybody's input, both on the transportation electrification side, which Alicia walked us through, and then also on the customer journeys from Ben. We've got a couple of follow-ups here from those topics. I think Shadia, Samantha, and Jen, we're going to circle back regarding the visibility and interaction between those technical and non-technical venues, and make sure that we've got the appropriate connections there. And then Ben, you were going to work with Sherry and explore other approaches for folks that are kind of in that gap between qualifying and not getting support via other agencies like the CAP. So thank you all for that. In regards to what is coming up for the organization, we have our transportation electrification staff report, which we're expecting within about a week. And we'll have comments then at the end of the month, and a public hearing scheduled for mid-October. We have also some IRP, that's integrated resource plan / clean energy plan, public meeting coming up. There's a CBIAG monthly meeting. And then we'll be holding our next learning lab around the time that transportation electrification hearing happens. We've got links on each of those topics within the materials here. If you'd like to pick up the materials from this meeting or recording. You can find them on the links out to our website. And if you've got further questions, please post them to that Learning Labs email address. We've also included dockets down at the bottom. And I'll leave it at that. We have a number of different items. We've got a correction here on the CEP IRP public workshop that's on September 14th. Sorry about that. If you have any other questions, feel free to drop them on either or any of those items or any of those links that we provided. We'll give a little bit of space. We've got a couple of minutes left if there are follow-ons, either on the Learning Labs or TEP or FlexLoad customer journey. Okay. Well, thank y'all. Really appreciate the input. It's always great to have these engagements, and it helps PGE moving forward. So don't be strangers. Let us know how we can help. Shadia?
Great. Nothing else from this end. Have a great rest of your day, and we will see you on October 19th at our next Learning Lab. Bye, everyone. Thank you
Bye-bye.
for participating.
Thank you. Bye.